Wait, I'm testing. It's okay? Good. It's not too close.
So Michael, I don't know if you saw my message in the platform.
Yes, I can see a message saying, I'm not sure if that's your message, but I can see a message saying the session leveraging the power of forests and trees for climate resilience will begin shortly. Is that the correct message?
So Michael, I don't know if you
Good morning to those who are here with us here today in this room. Good afternoon, good evening to those who are logging in online. And welcome to this very first session of the Global Landscape Forum Climate Conference on Forest, Food and Finance. My name is Mette Wilkie. I lead the work on forestry of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, perhaps better known by its acronym FAO. Just want to say that FAO is very pleased to be co-hosting this session on leveraging the power of forest and trees for climate resilience. With our partners, the Center for International Forestry Research, CIFOR, and the World Agroforestry Center, ICRAF. As we all know, deforestation and forest degradation are contributing to a planetary crisis that includes climate change, biodiversity loss, the degradation of natural ecosystems, poverty, inequality, and threats to human health. Forests and trees are undervalued, but they are critical resources to addressing these crises. Nature-based solutions are critical to keeping temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. Of these, halting deforestation has the most potential, since it would reduce global emissions by some 11%. World leaders know this. Earlier this week, more than 100 countries committed to ending deforestation by 2030, with $12 billion pledged in public funds put towards this goal. Very importantly, there was also a pledge of $1.7 billion to indigenous people and local communities who are invaluable agents against climate change through their protection and management of the world's forests. And tomorrow, FAO, with partners of the Collaborative Partnership on Forest, will host a high-level dialogue at COP26 on upscaling action to turn the tide on deforestation. But forested trees are not only important for their role in climate change mitigation. They provide multiple goods and services that contribute to resilience and adaptive capacity of both people and ecosystems. Forests and trees, however, are also negatively affected by climate change, including through increased incidences of severe wildfire, pests and diseases, and even landslides, making them less effective in providing these essential goods and services. Within the climate change agenda, forests rose to the top of priorities primarily because of their mitigation potential, largely through the mechanism on reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, the REDD+, something that FAO has been supporting countries, more than 60 countries, to develop strategies to reduce their emissions, together with our partners, the United Nations Development Programme and the United Nations Environment Programme. But very importantly, the role of forests and trees in climate change adaptation and resilience have not yet gotten the same attention in climate policy and action, including if we look at countries' national adaptation plans and their national determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. Adaptation and resilience tends to be forgotten. FAO wants to change that. A recent report published in collaboration with CIFOR and ICRAF through the CGIAR's research program on forest, trees, and agroforestry provides guidelines to countries for integrating forest and trees into their national adaptation planning. We also support a number of countries in building forest resilience through preventing, suppressing, and recovering from forest fires and major pest and disease outbreaks. And through our co-leadership with the United Nations Environment Programme on the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, we're mobilizing a global movement and action on the ground to restore degraded ecosystems, aiming to promote mitigation and adaptation synergies and to reduce trade-offs. In today's session, we will hear from scientists, indigenous peoples, and adaptation funders on the importance of forest and trees in the context of climate change and post-COVID-19 green recovery. This is just the beginning, and we look forward to engaging all of you in the collective effort that will follow to leverage the power of forest and tree for climate resilience. With that, I wish to thank you for your attention and hand over to Amy Duchel, the moderator for our event today. Amy, please.
Thank you so much, Mette, and thank you all for being here, especially our virtual audience online, which is more than 200 people at this point. My name is Amy Duchel. I'm also with FAO. I am in the Forestry Division and leading the Climate Change and Resilience team. And today we have a really stellar panel, both physically here in Glasgow, but also online. And I'd like to call up our speakers. So I will start first with Dr. Houria Judy. Dr. Judy is a senior scientist at CIFOR-ICRAF. She is an indigenous Algerian woman who has worked on ecosystem-based adaptation for more than 20 years. Houria is the co-organizer of this session with me, and she will provide a framing presentation and video that will give us the context for today's discussion. We also have two panelists online, if they could appear on the screen. There they are. There's one. There's Michael. Let's start with Michael. And there's Sumarni too. Great, fantastic. Great to see you. Great to have you here. Let's start with Sumarni. Sumarni is joining from Indonesia. She is community coordinator for Youth Act Indonesia and the leader of the Heartland Project, which raises awareness about deforestation across the Indonesian archipelago and countering the effects of climate change through tree planting efforts at the very local level. She was named one of the Global Landscape Forum's 16 Women Restoring the Earth in 2021, and she will talk to us today about the role of indigenous knowledge in climate change adaptation and resilience. And we also have Michael Belinga. He is team lead for combating wildlife trafficking in USAID's West Africa Biodiversity and Low Emissions Development Program based in Ghana. He has more than 20 years of experience on ecological forests, livelihoods, and governance issues. He is tuning in from Ghana, where he works, and will really bring us the aspects of biodiversity and the links between biodiversity and climate change adaptation, which we know are absolutely fundamental. And then we have Mr. Mohamed Asuyuti. He is the Senior Climate Change Specialist at the Adaptation Fund. He works very closely on mitigation adaptation synergies, vulnerability reduction, and the prevention and mitigation of disaster and climate-related impacts, which we all know are happening now and will be happening in the years to come. He's worked really at all the major multilateral development banks for climate, the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, the African Development Bank, and the French Development Agency, and he's going to give us state of play about finance for adaptation and what's happening in the negotiation space, but also what the Adaptation Fund is doing. So I would just like to call up our two physical panelists as well, so that we're all sitting together on the stage. And with that, I will also turn it straight away over to Ms. Houria Judy.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you. Yeah, the mic is working. Good morning. Happy to see you here. Good morning and good afternoon to the ones who are online. I have to say that I have been in many COPs before, in many JLF before, but this is a very special one. This is a special one because we are still going through a pandemic, which makes it very difficult for many people to join. And that's why I am very happy today that when we were thinking about this event here, we thought that we will make it possible for some voices from the ground to tell us how they are dealing, how they are experiencing the climate change and the effect of climate change. This is the movie I am going to show you now. But then this COP is also very special for me, or this event is very special for me, because I'm going this time to talk about something which is very personal. I am not going to present, as I do normally, some results from studies. I am going to talk about my own region, my own village, and my own country. So please, maybe we can start with a movie, and then we can move to my talk. Thank you.
ميل الضيور يغال الخلا لا يسترهب أتولي ولا الضيور مساكي تتون وحد سندي الخلا الحيوانات نتف موتن دي الخيب بحيرين النغص إلا العذ مسكين يسرى مرت بحير ثنينس ويزنوزو الخضراني يتوي داين نظن ويتوي تسخامي تنتد وراويس أبرمي قوفتي بحير ثنين سطرغا يروح نفس دي الزمارتيس كي يعتب يروح باطل سورتو من مانوالي تلفزيون إلا تيمورني مرايا يارغانا الكلية نقراسك كي هافضرو يذنا
تقوذ
سورتو ويقاذي ولان بلي اشو يضران دي ثموراين ياكو يرغانا كل هذه العيبات صافا تيجي خاف الصفر اللي ندي غاي نور وانت هاتوهني حتى انت تخافي وتنفرغ ساون قيقة نقيمة تنتوالي كان تغال ستيني تيمستني ساعتي فراوي دقيقة كانت مستقو شوارني ترد داك سر فلان انا مشي لي جن انت دارت لنا مرغف الحمد لله كان ساعة مان لان لي جن انت دارت حرش هنايا قواتنا بو نخدم كوينه مول الجبل انا معني قراسني لي جن وعبان ولا شكو ثني شبان سبل نامور نسن ولا ضارغن يخام نسن ولا ضارغن الغاشمس hampirnya di pasar bisa kita jualan apalagi tidak ada sampan jadi pokoknya susah lewat tanam pohonnya padat-padat jadi tidak usah ditebang itulah minum kayak dulu tahun dulu kan tak boleh ditebang. Betul. Sekarang banyak yang ditebang karena untuk kan perlu kayunya untuk bahan bangunan jadi untuk mengatasinya kita harus nanam kayu yang padat-padat lah beberapa tahun lagi.
Ya kagone Fatimata
sida mam la ba mo ko rasmani mambe
sida ton be kaya ka kwadba sida nimbana ne la sa pawo be petal hamani
la sapora wotonra anna me hida ton pane hem pawo bi mam pu ko woto nyo ko me sama me man ka sapora pinna amara pinna sa pawo da me la wo ko makata tote pawti nyon tawoto no kabe yenne la hanyon woto no ni ya shoma woto no e kukwa kala han sonte yella mana woto kukwa ka biriga fa la ya sida nyawa ko bum yete ya nyawa ya shem ton bala ton tara samen ya zwat mo bene ton ka mo la nyawa ye yo aya shoma ya sida la pushu kunyo Zoat ba han wan bene ton kano fa ketin sidia songri dila ton sid kewewa en kewewa ti sembo songri be ne mahan na leke tedo on pa ba yakren sa pusa on pa ba yakren kala kutame yakren la ton yi ya woto han par ken sanam doto
Poconé, que é dos portais de entrada que é a nossa cidade pantaneira, é uma cidade que sofreu bastante. Primeiro, com a falta de chuva. Aí, após a seca muito extensa, veio o fogo. Esse fogo causou uma série de problemas, né? Tanto para as pessoas quanto para os animais. Para a gente, a cidade ela amanhecia e permanecia o dia todo coberta de fumaça.
Trouxe muita doença de pulmão para as pessoas, porque a fumaça aqui, chegava esse horário aqui, você não enxergava quase nada, tampava até o sol.
ديال كلشي مزيك، هادو غاتتجور، هادو غنتبحيرين، غديو غالا روحها مزيك، هاهي.
Climate change is happening. We see it. It's happening in the ground. And it's not happening in the future. It's happening now. And as we see from this movie, people are the ones, people at the local level, are the ones who are facing this effect of climate change. When I am here and I heard the pledges for forest which have been made here, I am very happy to hear that. But I am also happy if those pledges and this finance will reach the people in the ground, will reach the people who are fighting climate change. And I hope that in the next future we won't be seeing people fighting huge fires with tree branches. Now I would like to move to my second part of this talk, and this part will take us actually to my own region. Can you please give me the presentation? So the idea of this session was actually because of the fires. And the incredible thing is that while the world was waiting for the IPCC report, I was also waiting for it. I didn't know that at the same day in my own region, there is this fire unfolding and destroying the whole region. So seeing actually what the IPCC was saying happening right now. This is how my region looked during these fires. And many livelihoods, many lives, and many people lost everything they had. I would like to bring you to the region before those fires. This is a region where forests and trees are extremely important. There is no place in this region where there is no tree, because without trees we won't survive. This is just like that. It's without trees we are not going to survive in this region. One of those trees is the cedar. I will start with this one. This is one of the most important species in our forest. It has an incredible role in everyday life, but it has also a spiritual meaning for us. Our houses are actually built with the cedar. You need 3 trees to build your house. If you don't have those trees, you cannot build that house. And we actually are growing up in a house where we are between big trees. And those are present in our lives every day. In past times, babies will sleep in trees inside. The little cribs for the babies are made by tree barks. It's not that you are just living in a house made by trees, but you come in the wood and sleep in a tree. So those trees are extremely important for us. So seeing those trees burning is not that this is a certain biomass who is becoming carbon, it's going out there in the air. This is your identity. This is your culture. This is your history, which is burning. Other trees are very important for us, like fig trees or olive trees, who are in the agroforestry systems, not in the forest. And as a kid, when you go to the school was far. You are very happy when you have in your pocket a little fig to have energy to do the whole way to the school. So those trees are survival for us. And now I would like to understand why are those trees burning? Why is this forest burning? Why are we trying to restore in so many places, and we are not protecting what we have already, which is more important? This picture is the national park, the Georgia National Park. And maybe the only good news I have today is this park didn't burn. Why this park didn't burn? This is because it's surrounded by villagers who, by protecting their own villages, they protected the national park. So here we see that having people, having local people are the guardians and the stewards of the forest means increasing resilience and protecting our forest. So we need to make sure that those people are getting the finance and the capacities they need to be there, because adaptations happens locally. Forest is local. If we don't go to the local, we are not going to protect the forest, we are not going to be resilient. The second point I want to make is about the social capital of people. Even if everything is burning, people are still having their social networks and their social relations. And we need to build on that. And we need to build on local institutions who are there to protect this forest and to become more resilient. But what we are also saying is that even we have a lot of knowledge and experience in those fires, because the region, we have always fires. What we are experiencing is what Sarah in the movie was saying. Those fires had wings. We are seeing the intensity of those fires getting so high that people cannot deal with it. Our knowledge, our traditional knowledge, sometimes is not enough anymore. This is an example of strategies against the fire we used to have by protecting the fields with these fig trees. But now this is not working anymore. They all burned this year. What we need is really to produce knowledge which is at scale for people by combining local knowledge and scientific knowledge. We think that if we burn, we will restore, and sometimes that is how we restore. We cannot restore biodiversity so easily because it takes time. And this is really not what I want to see in the Kabylie in my region being restored. This picture, this is what I want to see. I want to see restoration which will bring the biodiversity of the system, which will protect the functioning of the system, and which will heal the relation of people with their environment. We are seeing here that forest itself is changing. Normally this picture, if I showed you this picture in a different time, everything will be covered by snow. This is now no snow there. This means that our environment is changing, our forest is changing, and we are actually thinking we can count just on forest to be able to protect us. We are having a lot of expectations. We need actually to understand what are the changes happening in the forest. We need to link the capacity and the resilience of the forest with the resilience of people. But we need to make sure that we are understanding what is happening in our forest. Because nature, we think, will be on our side. Nature is on our side, but nature is only on our side and protect us if we protect nature. If we are destroying the forest, if the forest is changing because of the climate change, there will be a day the forest cannot protect us. Also, we cannot just count on forest. We need to decarbonize our economy. We need to change our food systems. We need transformational adaptation, which is being to change our behavior and the way we interact with nature. Zara in the movie, we didn't put actually this part of the movie, when we asked her what makes her actually strong to deal with the fires. And she told us that the one thing who made her really, really strong is now, after 3 months from the fires, when she's walking in the forest or in the fields, she will see the little leaves, the little green leaves coming back. And she said that her hope grows with those leaves. I hope that today here, and I mean not only today, but at this COP, we won't let the hope of people who are fighting climate change in the ground die. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hodia, for that very personal story. And I'm just so sorry that that happened, and really that was one of the motivations for bringing this session together, because even those fires in Algeria didn't get very much international coverage, and it touched a globally known adaptation scientist in a very personal way. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to bring up our panelists on the screen because we're going to have a bit of a discussion, and I would like to encourage those sitting here today with us to think of your questions for the speakers while you're listening, because we will pass the mic. We haven't done that in 2 years, so we want to do that today. I also encourage the people who are virtually participating to put your thoughts, questions, ideas into the chat, because we will also bring that into the discussion. I mean, Horia, really, you emphasize this importance of indigenous knowledge and the combination of indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge, and importantly, how that's changing. And I think that's such a key, is that the world is changing so much faster than we thought it would, and even than the IPCC scientists thought it would. It is unprecedented, and everyone is really taken by surprise. So I went to Sumarni. You're here with us, and Sumarni you're an indigenous woman, and you are working so closely on the ground with indigenous communities in Kalimantan, and also managing some of the world's most extensive and biodiverse forests. And in preparing for the session, you and I had a conversation about leveraging this indigenous knowledge for climate adaptation, and you told me some really interesting stories of how your people are doing that. And I guess I would just like to ask you if you could share that with the broader audience today. What are concrete ways that you've seen indigenous and local knowledge used in climate change adaptation strategies and building resilience on the ground?
Thank you, Ami. Tabe, greeting from Central Kalimantan. Yeah, I'm actually an indigenous Dayak Ngaju from Central Kalimantan. And honestly, when I watched the video, I was crying because I experienced myself the forest fire that hit our island in 2019 and 2015, and actually this year. And only a couple of months ago in September, we are facing a big flooding. It's a very big flooding that never in 40 years history we faced that, and we went to the village and stuck with the villagers. It's really difficult, like climate crisis already hits our island for 6 months, for 6 years. Every single year, we're facing many of natural disasters. And then I think it's very important to building an adaptive and resilient community. And luckily for the people in Kalimantan, because especially the indigenous community, they are very connected with the nature. They are observer, they see, they hear the signal from the bird, from the voice in the forest, from the tree that grow, that give them signal to get ready to facing something. Like, for example, in August, there is a big fires in Katingan, and at the time, the community really have not harvested their paddies, but then they hear the voice of bubut bird in the forest, and bubut give a signal that the water level will increase, and there will be a flooding in the area, and therefore they hurry to harvest their paddy, their vegetables. So at least passing during the difficult time, they still have a food, even though the road access to the area cannot. Even though the flooding cut all the road access to the area, and they cannot get health facility. So in terms of food security, the indigenous people they still can adapt, but in another term, it's very difficult for the people.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean thank you for sharing that, and I think this is again, the importance of these signals that are so embedded in culture, and how this is also changing so quickly. You also are not only doing this incredible work on the ground, but you're also a youth activist. And we've seen the power of the youth movement for climate. We see it here in Glasgow at COP26. You are in that movement in Indonesia. And I think I'd just like to sort of get your perspective on, the traditional knowledge and the changing world, and young people's relationship with nature is also changing. Sort of what do the youth in Indonesia need for being resilient, moving forward in the face of everything that we're seeing?
Yeah, you are right. The cultures, we are in the modern world right now, and there are so many changings, not only the natural world, but also our daily life. Because long time ago, we are still connected to the nature. For myself, for example, I used to live in my indigenous communities. When I was young, I learned a lot about the traditions, the wisdom. I also learned from the nature many things, like the forest is our school. But to get a higher education, we have to move to the city. So at least like one day car driving for your hometown, and then you lose connections to your family, you lose connections to your elders, and that's the starting of the problems, because many of indigenous knowledge is oral knowledge that you learn from practice, and then it's passed by old elder generations to younger generation. But what happened when the younger generation have to move from their community to get a better education, to get a better job? And then I see that many issues in Kalimantan. They lose many young people. There is a gap between the younger generations to the elder generations, and then it's very crucial for us to make the bridge to decrease this gap. Because I see like the indigenous knowledge and trade and wisdom is very crucial, like for us to, for example, when we are passing the climate crisis, like indigenous people, they're very connected to the time and space. There is always time for everything, starting and or stop doing something, for example, in agricultures. But because of the climate, it messes up the time, and you cannot start open your paddies, planting your paddies or vegetable. But when like the signals in the forest, you understand like, oh, this is the best time to do that, and what kind of vegetable that grow well even though in the difficult situations. The elders know better about that. That's the kind of thing that we don't learn in our modern school. Therefore, I think it's very important to connect this tradition knowledge with the modern science nowadays. Yeah. And also the young people, the indigenous young people, they need to not only see what happened in the community, but to see what happened in this world too. That's very important.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think one of the things, we all read the IPCC report that came out a few months ago, and I think one of the things that maybe felt like a gut punch is the real certainty that even in the best case scenarios, we will exceed 1.5 degree warming, which we hopefully can then bring back down by the end of the century, and that much of the change is irreversible. It's done and it's baked in, and we will feel it. And and young people will feel it more than people my age. And so this is, it hurts actually. I have little kids. It's every year this is going to get worse. Every year we're going to feel this. And so it's important that forests and trees, which are a solution, that young people also have that solution and have that at their disposal for moving forward. So thank you for that. We'll move to Michael Balinga, and Michael brings this, Hody also really emphasized this important connection between biodiversity and climate change adaptation. And I think we've seen in recent years, those of us who work in forestry and land use know this, but you know, the agendas, the international agendas between climate and biodiversity coming together, including in a formal way through the Nairobi Work Program, which brings together biodiversity and climate change adaptation together, and part of the negotiations in this COP. Michael, you live in West Africa. It's, you know, which holds one of the world's oldest and most biodiverse forests, the Upper Ghanaian rainforest. You know, what are the challenges that this ecosystem is facing, and how does that impact the ability of the ecosystem itself and the communities that depend on it to adapt to climate change?
Thank you, Amy. The Upper Guinea rainforest is currently a very highly fragmented system and very severely threatened. But I think there is proof actually today that pretty much 90% of its original surface area has been lost. And the question is why? This is actually because people are trying to cope with life's challenges, the challenges thrown at them by climate change problems, social, economic problems that they need to solve. And unfortunately, in an effort to cope with these challenges, communities put even more pressure on the forests and natural resources that are around them. And this locks them into a vicious cycle. So I think back to two scenarios that I've lived through in West Africa. A few years back, waking up one morning and looking outside my window under pouring rain, and then the clouds lifted, and I saw that the entire hill opposite my house was gone. So there had been a landslide at about 5:30 a.m. in Freetown. Many people lost their lives, many people lost their livelihoods, and overall it was a desperate situation. I see the same thing happening in another community in Guinea, in the Kolum sub-watershed on the Fouta Djallon highlands. And what is common about these two situations is the fact that communities living in Freetown had destroyed pretty much all the tree cover in the hills around the city. Also, the communities living in the Kolum sub-watershed had destroyed all the trees on the slopes of these hillsides. So it buttresses the fact that these communities need to be able to survive. But in doing so, they are not provided the right guidance, they are not provided the right resources and the right technology to be able to do that in a way that guarantees their resilience rather than destroys the capital, the biodiversity and environmental capital that they need to be able to survive. So I think it is this vicious cycle that we need to break. We need to understand that as more species are threatened with extinction, we run the risk of seeing ecosystems collapse. And therefore, we run the risk of destroying what would actually ensure the very resilience of the communities who depend on these ecosystems. These are just two examples, and I'm sure there's many more that we can find, not just in West Africa, but across the world. It's the fires, it's the floods, it's the mangrove ecosystems that are destroyed, and the fisheries that we lose. It's about everything in nature that allows us to survive.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And you know, you're in a unique position. You're with USAID, you're leading major initiatives in the region. I mean, maybe give us some hope about things that you've been implementing, that you've been co-implementing, solutions that you've seen. I mean, what are stakeholders doing to address this in very concrete ways that we can, you know, get our heads around and you know, think about ways forward?
Thank you, Amy. Actually, I work for a wonderful USAID program that has been running for, or funded. This funding has been available for at least the last 6 years, hopefully going on for another 4 years, perhaps more. And the focus of this activity is to help communities in the Upper Guinean forest achieve resilience through the conservation and restoration of forest cover and landscape biodiversity. So there's work being done helping people to understand what it means when species are lost, either through trafficking, poaching, or habitat loss. Educating communities and empowering them to contribute to reducing the loss of their forests and their biodiversity in these landscapes. And that implies helping them figure out how to make sure that there is inclusion of all stakeholders, youth, women, etc., in landscape restoration options. Promoting the benefits from forest and tree-based activities, so helping them restore mangroves, for instance, and seeing the opportunities that this creates to bring back fish communities or to bring back other forms of livelihoods for women. Empowering them in terms of governance institutions so that they have a voice, so that they can participate in designing the adaptation strategies that are being done in Sierra Leone, for instance, where that was done. But it's also reintroducing the right agricultural technology, improving market access, and integrating trees at the farm level and at the landscape level so that we can address issues of soil erosion, flooding, soil fertility, or even conflicts between farmers and herders. And I think what I note or what I see is that increasingly biodiversity and tree-based approaches to ecosystem and human resilience are being adopted as best practices in West Africa. Mm-hmm. It's not that the trees are the solution to climate change and adaptation in and of themselves, but it's rather the governance systems that are put in place around trees, the cultural values that they represent, the habitat that they provide for other species that we need to be able to survive. It's all of that that contributes towards building the needed coping and adaptation systems in the long term. And so that makes an argument for intentionally promoting the research, the policies, and the funding for tree-based, forest-based, biodiversity-based approaches to resilience.
Great, perfect, thank you, Mike, and you know, let's finance. Yeah, we need also finance to make this happen, and that we turn over now to our other panelist here, Mr. Mahamat Asuyuti, who has worked on climate change finance for many years, and Mahamat, I think mitigation, adaptation, finance, and partnerships are the goals of COP26, including mobilizing the 100 billion annually needed, both for mitigation and adaptation. We still see most finance going for mitigation. And no matter how strong the calls are for 50-50, we're not seeing it yet. And actually, at this very moment, while we're having our session here, the negotiators from all least developed countries, small island developing states, are in a pre-negotiation meeting, intensively discussing this issue of how to bring this forward and not close COP26 without making sure that this is resolved. So you're in a unique position with the Adaptation Fund, and we're really happy to have you here. I guess maybe for those who don't know, just give us a sense of what is the Adaptation Fund and how does that fit in with the broader climate finance landscape?
Thanks, Amy. And let me start by thanking CIFOR, FAO, and ICRAF for this invitation. I think the discussion on adaptation finance has been ongoing for a while. And as you said, the gap on adaptation finance is still very, very huge. So, I mean, this is something we need to discuss, and forestry, for example, is something which has been missing. And you're right. I mean, the Adaptation Fund has been working for more than a decade now, and we have been created initially as part of the Kyoto Protocol. And we start receiving funding from the proceeds of the CDM, but as you know, I mean, this CDM mechanism hasn't worked as much. So we start receiving some voluntary contribution from donor countries. The fund has been set up to finance immediate and urgent adaptation needs of the countries, and we have been supporting more than 100 countries so far. I mean, the portfolio is about 860 million so far, and countries which are eligible to the adaptation fund can access up to $20 million for adaptation needs. And we have basically funded projects on different sectors. I mean, the portfolio runs across 10 sectors so far, but this doesn't reflect any sector allocation or any guidance by the fund. This is the needs we receive from the countries, and then we fund it. Now, the adaptation fund is not the only fund which is under the climate convention. You have the other two funds, the Green Climate Fund and the GEF. So the adaptation fund is quite modest, but again, I mean, our operations are unique in the sense that they contribute to concrete adaptations projects on the ground. So we tend to focus on investment that address immediate adaptation needs of the countries. So that's one of the feature of the adaptation fund. And the other feature, which is also quite important, is that we have pioneered what we call direct access modality. Mm-hmm. So for all the adaptation fund, countries can access funding directly to the fund, so they don't need to go through these multilateral implementing entities, although some countries have to do that because they don't have national implementing entities. So this is one of the things we have been pioneering so far, and it's been working. Yeah, so this is about the adaptation fund, but let me maybe say a bit about the climate finance for adaptation. So as you know, the UNEP has published its recent adaptation gap report, and it's estimated that between 250 to 500 billion is needed for adaptation per year. This is only up to 2050, and this is only for developing countries. Mm-hmm. So you see how much the demand and the needs are there. Now the other issue, which is like the really big issue, is that adaptation finance still accounts only for 10% of the total international climate finance. And this has been the case for many years. I mean, this figure hasn't really changed over the last almost 10 years. I mean, mitigation accounts for 90% and the adaptation 10%. Well, one small hope is that between 2018, 2019, and 2020, the adaptation finance has increased by 50%. So it shows that maybe there is some effort being made by the international community to address the adaptation finance gap. But again, we're still very far from the real, change on the ground. So unless we address the adaptation finance gap, we still have this issue that developing countries will face some basic issue like how to address food security, how to address, like Huria has mentioned, how to make sure that their livelihood is not threatened by some of these climate impacts. Well, now for us, like for the adaptation fund, I mean, although the finance is lacking, we still have some funding coming to us. But the issue we have now in addressing adaptation needs on the ground are not much about funding, although, I mean, the funding is there, but there are other issues which are quite important. One of them is, like Mete has mentioned, that adaptation needs sometimes are driven by local communities, but they are not expressed in the national policies. So, for example, when you go to a country, the national government has different priorities, which sometimes are completely not aligned with what the people on the ground are needed. And as you know, most of those climate funds, they work with national designated authorities, which are part of the government. So at the adaptation fund now, we're trying to see how much of the local needs can be expressed in this project we receive. And this goes with what we call the locally led adaptation actions. And we have worked with the Global Commission on Adaptation to set up some principles to make sure that what's expressed by communities on the ground reach the adaptation fund through the projects. So how to link the central level to the local level is one of the issues we have. The other issue is this issue of the capacity building, which we have been talking about for long. I mean, although countries have, they know what is their adaptation needs, sometimes it's very difficult. Actually, it's not sometimes. Most of the time, it's very difficult to move from these needs to actual work on the ground to make sure that the projects are ready for implementation or for funding and implementation. So, and again, as you know, we as Climate Fund, we only fund a project which addresses an adaptation to climate change issue. And this issue about climate rationale or adaptation reasoning is really important. And the difficulty for countries to structure a project which responds to an adaptation needs is there. So we provide some funding for readiness to help them, for example, move from an idea of project to a project is there, but there is no capacity on the ground. So sometimes it's just impossible for local communities on the ground to express their needs in a way that it can be funded by the Adaptation Fund or by the GCF. So this capacity building on the ground to structure and develop a project proposal is one of the issues. I will end by saying that well, we keep talking about public finance for adaptation. I mean, public finance for adaptation is key. It's important to address the adaptation needs through this contribution by donor countries. But it's really nothing. You know, when you compare the climate finance overall, the international public finance is really peanut, you know, compared to what is really mobilized out there. And most of this funding is coming from non-public sector, like private sectors, like sometimes alternative funding opportunities or sources. And right now, we don't have that in the adaptation. I mean, this is happening more on the mitigation. So the business case for a mitigation project is very easy to make. I mean, developing a renewable energy project is much attractive for a private investor. But when it comes to adaptation, it's a bit difficult to attract these private sector entities. And well, at the Adaptation Fund, we don't provide funding through private sector. So our funding is really helping countries to unlock this other part of the fund. But again, this is really not happening on adaptation now. I mean, if you compare the amount mobilized by the private sector for adaptation, I mean, I don't have the figure, but it's really nothing, you know. And this is a dilemma that we still don't have an issue, don't have a solution to it. So in my view, this is where the gap is lacking. I mean, although we say 10% of the climate finance is going to adaptation, but we don't look at how much private sector is putting on adaptation. So this is one. And I will end on that, on this question by saying that, well, at the Adaptation Fund, we provide limited funding. I mean, a maximum project size for us is $10 million, and a country can access up to 20 million. But most of our projects, when they reach completion, they have delivered results on the ground, and we expect that these results are sustained and scaled up. And this is lacking right now. So if, for example, when you get a project which is at the end, in most of the case, there is no sustainability, there's no replication. The project ends there, and then we move to something else. And this is a huge opportunity which is missed here. So we are working now with some of our sister organizations like the Green Climate Fund to see how we can transition from our project to their funding with this scaling up. And we believe that this is one of the way to scale up this adaptation finance to that. I will stop here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It's fantastic. And maybe just before I turn it over, because I do want to open to discussion, we've heard a lot here. You know, in your portfolio, we also know that forestry projects are few and far between. I mean, could you just give us a sense of what you're doing with forestry in the Adaptation Fund? I mean, what are some promising initiatives that you've seen? Give us a sense of, so we can feel it, you know, what does a forestry project in the Adaptation Fund look like?
Thanks, Amy. I will be brief. Well, I'm going to give a figure which we're not proud of it, but that's what we have. I mean, forests, the forest portfolio at the Adaptation Fund is very small. It's about 2% of our portfolio. So it shows you how much, I mean, how difficult we're doing with that. And there is a reason. I mean, one of the reasons is that we work on the basis of the country drivenness. You know, we fund only what the countries are putting forward for funding. And again, as Mete has said, adaptation is not well expressed in the NDCs, and even worse for forestry. I mean, countries don't see, or sometimes they don't take time to identify how much adaptation benefit can be provided by forest-related issues, for forest sector. And we're really trying to see what the adaptation can do to unlock this adaptation benefit in forestry. So now we come up with some guidance document which can help countries to address that. And one of the things we've been doing is a nature-based solution. I mean, this is one way to make sure that adaptation benefits can also be addressed through forestry. And nature-based solution is one of the sectors we are trying to do now. And I'm very pleased to see that nature-based solution is one of the discussions happening at the COP here. There is a real move at this COP to fund issues related to nature-based solution. The other aspect of the work the Adaptation Fund is doing is everything related to climate change adaptation at the local level. The local-led action now is really putting issues on forestry, because in many of the areas we work, forests really provide adaptation benefit in terms of food security, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of climate change mainstreaming, and so on. So for us, really, the narrative behind the benefit, the adaptation benefit in forestry is something we have to put out there for discussion. And again, it's only starting now. So we really hope that by the end of this COP, maybe the discussion around the nature-based solution can shift the narrative from mitigation generated by forestry to something like adaptation towards that. So yeah, it's not very promising as a response, but we believe that by doing so, we can address adaptation through forestry as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, FAO was recently accredited to the Adaptation Fund, so hopefully we can work together on that. So yeah, now I just want to open it up. We have human beings in the room, and I want to give people the chance to ask questions. I think we have some microphones circulating. So just raise your hand, briefly give your name, introduce yourself before you ask the question. We have someone right here in the front. Yeah, maybe you guys move closer.
Hello. Thank you so much for your presentations. They were all really engaging, and I was taking notes. I'm Andrea Tuttle from California, and thank you for your stories on wildfire. They're from Indonesia and Algeria? Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. They're very moving. My question has to do with adaptation to wildfire as fires become more intense and frequent and damaging. Certainly we see this in California. So first of all, do you see efforts to manage fuels, to create fuel breaks around communities as we recognize that fires are more frequent? And do you see any investments in basic fire training, suppression capacity, equipment, engines, retardant, crews, all of that goes with it? Is that, I mean, we have to recognize that this is happening, and I'm wondering if this conversation, which is so intense in California in managing fuels, is also taking place. Thank you.
Huria, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Well, this is exactly the point I wanted to bring in my presentation, that there are solutions which people can have to adapt to the fires, or at least, I mean, adapting is something and coping is something. Coping is what we do right now to just, you know, save our lives. And adapting should be actually something we plan for the future, where we, you know, we develop more strategies and more thinking about what we need for that. So for the coping part, yes, there are so many solutions we can have, but if I speak from the experience in the Kabylie, it is very interesting that I think we are all in kind of denial that this is not going to happen to you, this is not going to happen in your country, this is not going to happen in your village, this is not going to happen in your family. And therefore, the plans for adaptation, they are not at that level. So what I always say in my presentations and when I talk is that the adaptation plans we have at the national level, they are important as a framing, as a general framing, but we need to plan at the landscape level with these kind of solutions you are suggesting, which people can actually learn, adaptive capacity, they need finance for it, they need the knowledge for it, and in my region at least, I know there are those institutional structures there where everyone, every possible like solution can work because the people we are organized. We have a very, very old system of organization where people could learn these kind of strategies to protect their forests. As I showed in my presentation, we had in the past, because this region is known for fires, we had in the past fires. The difference is that the knowledge we had in the past, or we had until now, was kind of sufficient to keep us in a certain balance with the ecosystem. What we are experiencing now, and we saw it in all the movies we showed, that now we are reaching a level of intensity in the impact we are having that our local knowledge is sometimes not enough. And here, this is the most important thing, we need to bring different kind of experiences. We need to learn from other. We could learn from California, for instance. You could learn from us. But this is not the exchanges we are having. This need of knowledge sharing and building a kind of knowledge hubs where we can learn from each other. And this is extremely important for climate change because the change is happening so quickly. Our knowledge needs to be also happening quick. We need to learn from each other, and this is not happening yet, and we need to invest and encourage that.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah. We'll go to the next question. Thanks. We have a few hands here. Oh, over here, yeah. Great.
Yes, thank you, panelists. It was really very interesting perspectives. I'm John Kendall from Vancouver, Canada, with a company called Down to Earth Carbon, and we're, amongst other things, we're doing adaptation integrated with mitigation projects with the Smallholder Farmers Alliance in Haiti. And the question I have to the panelists, both here and online, would be, has there been some thought given, or what thought has been given to integrating this movement, this ambition towards regenerative agriculture, which has gone from just boutique projects, you know, with progressive cacao and cotton, to now to massive pledges to go to regenerative agriculture in their supply chains by 2030. Is that perhaps a way? Because what we're seeing, for example, in Haiti and Congo and other places on the ground, the best way that smallholder families and indigenous communities can adapt is by being involved more in converting their agricultural systems to more tree-based systems and diversifying and achieving resilience, and at the same time bringing a lot of carbon back down to Earth.
Thanks for the question. Maybe Michael, if we could bring him on. I mean, that's what they're working on in West Africa. Michael, are you with us?
Yes, thank you, Amy. I do think that this is a very, very good point. And it's very important because we look at the needs that people have, and these needs are needs for fuel wood, there are needs for building material. These are all tree-based. There are needs for food and fodder. These are all tree-based. And so some of the work that is being done in West Africa, especially in terms of watershed management, is precisely integrating trees into farms, into hillsides, outside home gardens, but just making sure that the trees play their role in diversifying the agricultural productivity on the one hand, in improving the soil fertility, and this is an issue of the choices of tree species that are proposed, but also that trees on hillsides help to facilitate integration or infiltration of water and reduce the runoff on slopes. So this is something that is being implemented on the one hand by the USAID funding in Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. But also I see IFAD have a program in Guinea doing similar work with farmers and trying to improve on integrating agroforestry and tree-based systems. So definitely that is something that needs to be promoted. That is something that needs to be scaled out and considered as the best practice. I'm not sure I've answered your question completely, but what I'm saying is there are examples where this is being tested, and so far the results seem to be encouraging, if I would put it that way.
Great, thanks, Michael. We have a few more questions here in the middle.
How you doing? Yeah, right, guys. My name is Thomas Richardson. I'm the founder of the startup Gaia, which we set up to get funding for agroforestry projects. And the way we do that is we leverage the natural capital potential of the project and then create a type of offset. I hate using that, now it's a dirty word, but it's, I suppose my question is to the gentleman in the middle here, is what barriers do you see for private sector kind of like investment in small scale projects or even larger scale projects in that sphere?
Yeah, well, perhaps I won't be able to provide a full answer because at the Adaptation Fund we don't provide funding for private sector. But from my experience with the other fund is that one of the main barriers we see on adaptation, for example, on agroforestry, for example, is related to the policy or the enabling environment on the ground. You know, in many countries you have this kind of needs, but the private sector needs some assurance that what they invest is going to generate some return. Otherwise, they won't be able to continue investing. And so far, the adaptation, for example, in the agroforestry sector, in many of the regions are more treated as a grant-based investment. So for example, at the Adaptation Fund, what we provide is to provide some funding to government to unlock this or to make sure that this environment are more prone for private sector. But we don't provide funding to help the private sector. So perhaps this is maybe a question to some of our sister organizations like the Green Climate Fund, which provide funding to private sector. Maybe they will be in a position to answer more of that.
Yeah. Thank you. I wasn't necessarily, looking for funding. What I was suggesting is what barriers do you see, like politically, with regards to private sector coming in and leveraging that natural capital potential? You know, is there like an overriding policy with regards to the natural capital of a region that states that, you know, private sector can't invest in that natural capital potential because it's part of the regional?
Yeah, like I was saying, the enabling environment is one of the issues. You know, most private sector they just don't see an environment which they can work on in many of developing countries. And for example, in terms of taxation, in terms of I mean, even some of the basic issues like legal structure like this. But again, I mean, when it comes to investment, I won't be able to really answer what is the barrier, for example, for investment of the private sector. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. We have lots of questions. This is nice.
Hi, I'm Jane Maloney from...
Can you stand up? Sorry, we just got this indication from our...
Yeah. Jane Maloney from South Africa, from the forest and forest product sector. I just wanted to ask, Michael talked about intentionally promoting research for tree-based mitigation and adaptation goals. And you also mentioned that most finance goes to mitigation, which is what everybody experiences. So I just wanted to know how they intentionally promote research, and are there opportunities for relating, because we have quite strong research in South Africa? And then I'm being greedy. Quick second question, the role of sustainable forest management when it comes to meeting the requirements for communities' wood-based needs.
Who wants to take this? These.
Michael.
Michael, yeah?
Yeah.
She said Michael.
First one, Michael, and then maybe the second one. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question, how to promote research. And I think it leads to the question of who should promote the research. I would go back a few years to the ECOWAS Commission developing what is called a Forest Convergence Plan for West Africa. And this plan has 6 pillars. One of those pillars is forestry production and research. So that is an example of a regional institution that purposely determines to consider forestry research as an important part of developing a strategy for sustainable management of the ecosystems and environment in West Africa. I think this is an example that can be copied. But the big challenge is not deciding to do that. It's where does the funding come from? We might want to ask ECOWAS, about 10 years since this document was produced, were they able to raise money for forestry research? I think that's where we would have challenges, making the linkages between the policy decisions and the resources for implementing these policy decisions. That's the challenge that I think this COP26 needs to be able to answer if we must succeed in using tree and forest-based solutions for addressing resilience issues.
Great. Thanks. And Mette, the second question.
Okay, can we get the microphone here to work? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. The second question was more on the wood supply, and I would just take us back to Africa again, because we know that more than 90% of all the wood that's cut in Africa is used as fuel wood or charcoal. 2.4 billion people around the world rely on firewood or charcoal to cook their daily meals. So when we're talking about adaptation, we are also talking about not just in the rural areas, we're also talking about the urban poor, because they have no other choice. And I want to thank Michael because he brings me down memory lane. 35 years ago, I moved to Freetown, Sierra Leone, where I worked for 3 years on trying to implement what we call sustainable forest management, to deal with that issue that they had of the fuel wood shortage, because every single day we would see long lines of children and women walking down to town with a bundle of fuel wood on their heads, cutting it down in the national forest that was up the hills. And as he explained, one of the results was a huge landslide very recently. 35 years ago, we tried to deal with some of those aspects through 3 major areas of work. One was to protect the existing natural forest from illegal cutting of wood, but in the same way introducing the sustainable management of that forest by selective cutting of some trees in the forest, so we could still maintain the canopy and the services that they were providing, but making fuel wood available. The second one was to enhance the natural resources, and one of those was by having agroforestry systems introduced, because people also cleared the forest simply to have their daily meals, to grow their food as well. So we introduced sort of a town-gear system where people would be able to get a plot and they would have some agricultural crops under the trees for a number of years, and some fast-growing trees that could very quickly then also be harvested for fuel wood, and you would continue that cycle. And the third one we did, and thanks Michael for also mentioning that, was actually the restoration of mangroves in the areas. There was a huge area of degraded mangroves just outside Freetown, and 35 years ago we instituted the first example in West Africa of trying to replant that with local species to make sure that we also increased the production of fuel wood. But it brings me to one thing, that we need to talk about more about just planting of trees. We need to talk about growing them, maintaining them in the long run, and that's where we fail, because this project, although it was successful, it only lasted for 5 or 6 years. We need to talk about long-term financing. We need to talk about how we deal with the underlying causes of this, which in many cases are poverty and the lack of alternative solutions. So that's where we need to step in, and that's not just something that we can do with forest and trees, but we need to deal with those underlying causes of poverty and how we can address that too. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mette, and that's really nice for the Global Landscape Forum, getting beyond the project approach to programmatic long-term investment, and change does take time, so that long-term view. So we're getting towards, maybe we have time for one more question before we have some closing remarks from, yeah.
Thank you for having the last question.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for Mohammed. You mentioned that too few countries are framing projects within the climate adaptation framework. Is this the only reason why the Climate Adaptation Fund is only funding, well, portfolio of NBS projects is only 2%? Or is there any other reason? Does the Climate Adaptation Fund have other priorities, or is it capping nature-based solution projects? Just if you can reply to that.
Yeah, thank you. And again, as I said, we don't have any sector allocation. I mean, we don't allocate funding to a certain sector or prioritize one against another one. This 2% portfolio is just reflecting what we receive from countries, you know, and countries can access up to 20 million, and in many cases they just use the 20 million to address some of their basic needs on adaptation, and most of the case they address food security in agriculture, for example, and they don't. And again, I mean, this doesn't apply to all countries, but many of them, they don't see the adaptation benefit from forest sector, for example. These days, they're now coming to us with more nature-based solution, which can be an investment in forestry. Ecosystem-based adaptation is one of the issues that we've been receiving funding requests for. But we don't, this 2% doesn't reflect any guidance or any sector allocation by the adaptation fund. It just reflects the type of requests we receive from the countries. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Horia?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something maybe to the discussion, which is what I'm hearing here and what we also see everywhere is we really need different types of integrations. We need to integrate so many things together. We need to integrate adaptation and mitigation. Your question about the mitigation is that we started with the climate, with mitigation being the first, you know, area of climate change, and now we are trying to bring adaptation in. But as you said very well, agroforestry systems have already both there. So the problem is that at the policy level, as you said, Mohammed, is that at the policy level there is still a lack of understanding the role, the adaptation role, which we need really to show more. And we also need to integrate the levels. We have the local level and the national level and the global level, and there is a lot of work which is needed to be done to integrate those. And then, of course, this is what you are saying, Mette, is to integrate the difference, like, I mean, in my village, and by the way, the person who was speaking in the movie was my mother, was my friend, and the lady sitting with her is my mother. When you go to my village, there is no difference in, you know, like people use the landscape in a very integrative way. So the division between agriculture, agroforestry, and forestry is something also we need to integrate more. And then, of course, link it to poverty, because the poverty of people, this is the issue which we need to deal with. So I think that we really need to work toward integration in different ways.
Okay. Thank you, Horia. So with that, I want to call up our final speaker. This is Dr. Ravi Prabhu. He's the Director of Innovation, Investment, and Impact at CIFOR-ICRAF. He's been in the front row listening intently this whole time, and he's going to provide just some closing reflections on what he's heard, where to go. Ravi's an accomplished scientist and a visionary, so we'll just let him go. Okay.
Thank you very much, Amy, and I'm humbled to be in this company, both physically and virtually. It was fascinating to hear this. So just thinking about this session, as I flew in towards Glasgow, I thought, with the declaration that the leaders have made on forests, should we be putting up a banner, mission accomplished? And then I thought back, just as Mette was talking about memory lane, about my memory lane. And the fact is, well, I cut my teeth, just to take you back, almost 40 years ago, on trying to work on certification, which was then going to be the solution to the deforestation problem. We've had successive waves of this. The New York Declaration on Forests did not stop deforestation. So one of the advantages of being an old man is being allowed to be a cynic. So if we want to take what is clearly an opportunity and really realize the potential for forests and trees to contribute to resilience, then it can't just be, Amy, about moving from projects to programs, rightly so, or integration, Horia. It is about our paradigm change. The problem remains that if forests and trees in the imagination remain the add-on, rather than the landscape, as Horia you were talking about, is the framing of all life, we're going to be in trouble. As long as we take technocratic approaches with the biology and the biophysical elements first, and not social capital, we're going to be lost. I've seen brilliantly planned carbon offset programs fail because local communities did not have legal tenure. But these were the same local communities because of which the forests have been there for thousands of years. So we have a problem in the way we see things, and we need to see them differently. I think I didn't hear anything from anybody here that I disagreed with, but I just wonder whether we're all far too close to the elephant. So if we step back and ask ourselves what then needs to change in terms of paradigm, well, a few of us have been thinking about this, and the thing that strikes me most, and Horia, I know the story about your village, and the sacrifices they make, is a simple term. And it's something that we all recognize. It's a term of stewardship. Looking beyond the commodities we take out of nature to looking after nature itself. So the question we're asking ourselves, what does a stewardship economy look like? An economy which rewards not just the commodification of nature, but looking after the services beyond the commodities. And if what we've learned today from payments for ecosystem services, debt for nature swaps, etc., is that technocratic approaches to dealing with this that do not recognize agency are not likely to succeed. They are part of the solution, but they're not the whole solution. So I was wondering very simply, and I recognize that we have a number of really important organizations here. What if we were to step back and, in the interest of integration, look at the agency, the social capital, and the human capital of people within a context and a framing of stewardship and a stewardship economy that rewards services as well as commodities. So not nature as a commodified service, not carbon because you're offsetting it, but the whole gamut. I was in discussions with two countries which face each other across a border with weapons, whose main concern tomorrow is where's the water coming from. And if farmers are only rewarded for producing more and much more with more inputs, then the water is going to continue to sink. It's at 200 meters below surface, so you can start guessing which country I'm talking about. And they're starting to pump up arsenic. They're cutting back the trees because the farmers are in debt and need to grow more because otherwise they don't get out of debt. So we need to break these spirals. I heard about regen agriculture. Well, you will be pleased to know there are farmers' movements of 1 million farmers working on this in countries like India and around the world. So I think we need to tap into that social capital, and we need to understand that adaptation and mitigation both flow from improved livelihoods, and we need to secure livelihoods.
Great.
With that, Amy, back to you.
Ravi, thank you so much, and that's a perfect way to close our session. I just want to thank you, Mette, Huria, Ravi, Muhammad, Michael, Sumarni for being here with us today. All of you in the audience, all of you online. FAO is committed to this agenda. We're working in partnership with CIFOR-ICRAF on many issues, but also on this critical issue of leveraging the power of forests and trees for climate resilience. Thanks again for being here.
What a great series of sessions on FMNR, Sustainable Forestry and Climate Resilience to kickstart GLF Climate. Welcome to GLF Climate, a global hybrid conference dedicated to tackling climate change by triggering positive tipping points across roads, landscapes to initiate the urgent systemic change needed. My name is Jazz Mota, and I'll be your host for the day, joining you from Belém do Pará, Amazonia Forest, Brazil. Welcome to those joining online and in person. To take an active part in shaping the way forward, carry on the conversation through social media, through hashtag ThinkLandscape and hashtag GLFClimate. Simultaneous translation in French and Spanish is provided for all sessions through the event. Download the Interaction app from the Apple or Google Play Store, or access the web app from your desktop browser. Enter the code GLF Digital and plug in your headphones to access the translation service through the event. Next up, we have 2 interactive sessions on landscape restoration by IUFRO and GIZ. And stay tuned for CIFOR-ICRAF's Launchpad. Make sure to check out the climate talks in between interactive sessions featuring interviews and inspirational talks from leaders around the world. Thank you for joining this global event. Enjoy!
Recording stopped.